All right. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. We're kind of back here for the stretch run till Christmas, about 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks. And we will have a quiz over 6-1 to 6-2, actually Thursday. And then we'll have a test over 6-1 to 6-4 next week. And then we'll review for the final, the semester exam. So 6-1 to 6-2. Quiz will be on Thursday. All right, on 6-1, we learned how to solve what we call systems equations by graphing. There are two other methods. One's called substitution, one's called elimination. We're going to do elimination, or excuse me, we're going to do substitution, as it says right here. All right, so hopefully you had those guided notes, you printed those off, and we're going to go through those here in a second. All right, this part isn't on your guided notes, but just pay attention. As you can see here, it says sometimes it's difficult to identify the exact solution to a system by graphing. In this case, you can use a method called substitution. Well, here's why. If we graph 2x minus 1, it has a y-intercept of -1, and it has a slope of 2, positive 2, which means I go up 2 and to the right 1. I go up 2 and to the right 1. And then I can go down 2 and to the left 1. All right, so I'm going to graph that line. And it hits all those points. And I'm going to put an arrowhead here. Now, the other line, -1/3 x plus 2. So it hits at positive 2 is the y-intercept. -1/3 means it goes downhill 1, go down 1 over 3. Down 1 over 3, go up 1 over 3. And when I draw that line in there, and let's see here. Now, the two lines hit. I graph them correctly. This is the answer. The problem is it's not at a nice point. It's not at a point with whole number coordinates. You can't say it's 1, 1. So it's somewhere in between there. And with graphing method, we have to estimate. So it's, I don't know, I would say it's about 1.2 and then about 1.6. But I'm really just estimating. Now, if we had our Desmos grapher that we used on Friday, we could find it pretty, more accurately. But algebraically, this is where the downfall of graphing comes into play, especially if you're graphing it on paper. You're going to come across some where it just doesn't work into nice answers. This is where the other methods are going to become important. It's called substitution and called elimination. Well, we're going to talk about substitution. Well, what does it mean to substitute? It means you replace. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to replace something for a variable. Well, here's our steps. Basically, first thing we need to do is solve one of the equations for one of the variables. That means you get a letter by itself. So you need to get like y equals 2x minus 1. Or it needs to say x equals 3y plus 2. It doesn't matter which variable. We need to get one of them by itself. Sometimes it's already done. That's when we do is we substitute. We take that and we plug it into the other equation for the given variable, which I'll show you in a minute. And we substitute your answer for step 2 into the answer from step 1 and solve. All right, so this is the main step 1. Now, in this case here, it says solve the system by substitution. All right, both of them, and when I use substitution, I like to write them next to each other. So y equals 3x and y equals x minus 2. They both are solved for y. Well, this tells me that y is equal to, or y is the same as 3x. That means that in the other equation, what we can do is we can replace this y with that 3x because it says they're equivalent. Y is equivalent. Y is the same as 3x. So I can take this y out and replace it with 3x. And now I say 3x is equal to x minus 2. The reason that helps us is now both sides have an x. And I can figure out what x is by subtracting x, by just solving the equation. I get 2x equals negative 2. And when I divide by 2, I get x equals negative 1. Well, every answer is an ordered pair. So now you take this and you plug it back into the whatever we solve for. So now, since y is equal to 3 times x, and I know x equals negative 1, I can take the x out, replace it with negative 1. So y is the same as negative 3. So my answer is negative 1, negative 3. Now what you can do is you can always test it into both equations to make sure it's right. Otherwise, you may have made a mistake and you would have to go back and fix it. Well, if I plug in negative 1 for x and I plug in negative 3, do I get the same thing I do for the first one? If I plug in negative 3 for x and I plug in negative 1, look, my work's different. That's 3 times negative 1. And this is negative 1 minus 2, but they end up being the same. So now I know that that's the answer. Okay, so it's negative 1, negative 3. That is the solution to the system. That is the only point that works for both equations. All right, now that's the general idea for substitution. Now, like I said, I like to write for substitution them next to each other. First thing you say, do I have a letter by itself? In this case, I do. Y is by itself. Y is equal to x plus 1. So that means in the other equation, I can take out the y since it is equivalent to x plus 1, and I replace it with x plus 1. Now everything else stays the same. This 4x stays the same, plus, and you take the y out and you replace it with x plus 1. And so now I got an equation with just x's. 4x plus x is 5x, plus 1 equals 6. Subtract 1, I get 5x equals 5. Divide by 5, I get x equals 1. Now for this, I got to find the other point. Since x equals 1, go back to whichever one had the letter by itself. So it says y equals x plus 1. Well, I know what x is. X is now 1. So you take the x out, you put in a 1 for it. So this becomes 1 plus 1, which is 2. So y equals 2. So my answer is 1 comma 2. It wouldn't hurt to check it. So if I plug in 1 for x, 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is y. That gives me 6, so it works for that. And if I plug it in here, it gives me a true statement. So you can always double check your work and see and make sure that it works for both equations, the point. So 1 comma 2 is our solution. All right, and take a look at this one. It says solve the system by substitution. X minus 3y equals negative 1, and negative 2x plus 4y equals negative 2. All right, from the last one, you said you want to get a letter by itself, so where it's y equals or it's x equals. These first two both had y by itself. This one had it in both equations. This one had it in one. This one does not have a letter by itself. Now you want to look and see which letter would be the absolute easiest to get by itself. And the letter that's going to be easiest to get by itself will be the letter that does not have any coefficients in front of it. Because otherwise you're going to have to divide. But this x right here, this x is going to be the easiest. To get it by itself, what I need to do is I need to add 3y to both sides. And that's going to be x equals, those add up to 0. And then I like to write my variable first, so it's going to be 3y minus 1. Okay, now that is what x is equal to. That is what x is equivalent to. That is what x can be replaced by. So now this is the first time I think we've had a number in front of it or a coefficient. So this goes in for x. Everything else has to stay the same. So -2 comes down. We're going to take the x out and replace it. Hold on here. Replace it with 3y minus 1. Okay. The plus 4y has to come down, equals -2. Now we go through our solving like we did earlier in the year. Distribute the -2. Gives you -6y. -2 times -1 is a +2. Plus 4y equals -2. Since these are on the same side of the equal sign, we just combine like terms. -6y plus 4y is -2y. Plus 2 equals -2. Subtract 2. And then I get -2y equals -4. Divide by -2. And don't forget, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So I get the answer y equals 2. I still need to find what x is. Go back to this step over here where we get x by itself. I know x is equal to 3y minus 1. I know y equals 2. So now take the y out, replace it with 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 minus 1 is 5. So that leads me to the answer 5, 2. Now I can double check it by plugging it into here. X minus 3y equals -1. -2x plus 4y equals -2. So let me just check it real quick. What was the point? 5, 2. Replace the x with 5. It should be minus 3y. Minus 3 times 2. And we're going to say it equals -1. 5 minus 6 is -1. So it works there. -2 times 5 plus 4 times 2. We're hoping it equals -2. That's -10 plus 8. It does equal -2. So it works for both of them. So now I know for sure that 5, 2 is my answer. Okay. All right, now on this one, we had to get a letter by itself. The easiest one was the x. Okay, take a look at this one. I'm going to write them down beside each other for substitution. Again, look over both equations. Look over both equations. Which variable would be the easiest to get by itself? Now, for this case, you want to see if one of the variables has no coefficient, and it is this one right here, that y. So that means this is going to be easiest to subtract 2x. That gives me y equals, like I said, I like to write the variable first, -2x plus 6. All right, so that y is equivalent to, y is the same as, y is equal to -2x plus 6. So that means I can take the y out of the second equation and replace it with that expression, -2x plus 6, because right there we say they're equal. So I can substitute in one for the other. So now I get -3x plus 4. Take the y out. Put in -2x plus 6 equals -20. Distribute the -4. I get -3x. 4 times -2 is -8x. 4 times +6 is +24 equals -20. -3 and -8 is -11x. Plus 24 equals -20. That should not have an x on it. Subtract 24. and I get negative 11x equals negative 44. Divide by negative 11, and then I get x equals positive 4. All right, go back here. We got y by itself. I know x equals positive 4. So y is going to equal negative 2 times 4 plus 6. Watch you don't make any mistakes with your signs here. So I get negative 8 plus 6. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. You always have to list your answers in ordered pair. So since x is 4 and y is negative 2, that is going to be our answer. Always go back and just double check it. In this case here, you can mentally just go through here and make sure that when you plug in 4, negative 2, on the left it gives you 6, or the top one it gives you 6, the bottom one it gives you negative 20. All right, so that's substitution again. We didn't have a letter by itself. We had to get this y by itself. That is the easiest way to do it. All right, I think this is the last one we're going to do here together. Substitution, I like to write them next to each other. Now, which one is easiest to get by itself? It will be this y right here. Now, let me just show you something. Don't write this down, but just pay attention. Some people automatically just want to, because we've been doing slope-intercept form and we've been solving for y for a while. Some people just automatically do that in the first equation they see. Here's why you don't want to do it for an equation like this, because when you got a coefficient in front, now sometimes you don't have any options. This one we do, because when I got a coefficient in front, I got to divide by that coefficient, and that one is going to end up giving me several fractions. This is not easy to work with. You can do it this way and plug it in, but it's going to be much, much, much more difficult. So you want to find the simplest route to get one of the letters by itself. In this case here, I'm going to get this y in the second equation by itself. All I need to do is subtract 3x. That gives me y equals negative 3x plus 10. Well, that means y is the same as, y is equivalent to, and y is equal to negative 3x plus 10. And I can go back to the first equation and take the y out and put in negative 3x plus 10. Now, if you got a number or a minus sign in front of you, you must put this in parentheses because it is negative 3 times whatever y is. So that means I'm going to have to distribute this negative 3. All right, that's going to give me 2x. Negative 3 times negative 3 is 9x. Negative 3 times 10 is negative 30 equals negative 8. Okay. All right, now let's see what we get here. I get 2x plus 9x, which is 11x, minus 30 equals negative 8. Add 30. I get 11x equals 22. Divide by 11. I get x equals positive 2. All right, now I need to find the other answer. I know x equals positive 2. I know y equals negative 3 times x, which is 2 plus 10. And so I'm going to go ahead and find what y is. I get negative 6 plus 10, which is 4. So that means my answer is 2 comma 4. And then if you can always double check by plugging in the numbers back to the original and making sure they both work for that. All right, so this is the beginning of substitution. Okay, hopefully these steps make sense. You solve one of the equations for one of the variables. You got to get either y or x by itself. If it's not, sometimes it's already done. That's when you replace it from step 1 into the other equation. Solve it, and then you go back and find your answer. All right, here's your homework, classwork. 6 problems. You need to check each one and make this is how you tell whether you're right. You plug them in and then you see whether it makes both equations true, just like checking any solution. All right, you guys have a great day. We will talk to you later.